What is up mga Trops? Welcome to our channel. For this video, I'm going to share with you the main differences of Trades Recognition Australia or TRA and Engineers Australia or EA. I'm going to compare the different requirements from both sides, and lastly, I'm going to share with you why I ultimately decided to go with TRA instead of EA. Before everything else, a little bit of disclaimer. We are not a migration agent, and all the tips and tricks that we're going to discuss here in this video are based solely on our own research and experience. Just to give you a little bit of background, I am an electronics engineer by training, while my experiences are mostly with laboratory management and technician work. Let's begin with a guide from TRA or Trades Recognition Australia. This document was last updated April 2023. Section 1 is basically an introduction of what TRA is and what their objectives are. It also gives you an introduction of the MSA program or the Migration Skills Assessment Program, which is basically what we need for migrating into Australia. Section 1.4 details or outlines the application process for the MSA program. Everything now is done online. All the evidence that you will submit will need to be uploaded into your web portal. First, you have to register your account through the TRA online portal. Next, you have to upload the evidence. Once you have reviewed all the documentation that you have uploaded, you can complete the registration process by making your payment. The next section summarizes the documents that you have to submit to TRA. The documents you need to submit are pretty straightforward. It includes your passport ID, your qualifications or your diploma, for example, your academic transcripts, your employer template, and your pay evidence for each employment. And if applicable, you also have to submit your evidence of self-employment. The guideline also provides minimum requirements for scanned copies of your documentation. It also gives you guidelines on how to submit documents that are not in English. Here are the fees as of April 2023. Section 2 provides the program requirements and processes. If you've watched my previous video about skills assessment, you will see there that, as a guide, you can visit the DHA website or the Department of Home Affairs to determine if the TRA is the correct assessing body for your ANSCO code. The next section outlines the minimum requirements or the acceptable documents for your qualifications. I will not go into so much detail in this section because the requirements are pretty straightforward. Let's jump into the employment section. In order for TRA to recognize your employers, you'll have to submit an employer template for each employment that you want recognized. I would like to highlight section 2.3.4, wherein you are required to demonstrate 3 years of full-time or equivalent part-time paid employment. Those 3 years must be directly relevant to your nominated occupation and can be completed before, during, or after your comparable qualifications. Fair Work Australia also considers full-time employment in Australia as 38 hours per week. The last thing I'd like to highlight is 2.3.5, wherein it says that your evidence must demonstrate that you have worked for 12 months full-time or 38 hours per week within the last 3 years prior to applying to TRA. The next section gives you an outline of the pay evidence required depending on the employment type that you want to be assessed. Please note that you have to submit at least 2 verifiable sources of document for each year of the employment claim from the list below. To give you an example, for employment not completed in Australia, you can choose to submit 2 of any of the following: official government tax records, work permits or visas, social insurance records, and so forth. For employment completed in Australia, it's a bit more straightforward. You can choose to submit your income tax statements, your payslips, and your superannuation. And finally, they also give provisions on what to submit for your self-employment. The next sections are mostly about the assessment outcome, the review, the roles and responsibilities of TRA and yourself, guidelines in using agents or representatives, privacy disclosures and information, legal notices, and contact details for complaints and other matters. The next thing that I want to show you is the Migration Skills Assessment Employer Template provided by the Trades Recognition Australia. As you can see here, the form must be completed and signed by your employer or a direct supervisor who observes your daily tasks and duties. As mentioned earlier, you need to provide an employer template for each employment or employer that you want to be assessed or counted by the TRA. In the next page, the applicant's employer needs to describe the applicant's job role in their own words. This does not necessarily mean that you have to write an essay for this section. To give you an idea, this is how my employer's template looked like for one of my employers. As you can see, instead of doing an essay, it was done through bullet points. It makes the job description very straightforward and concise. In the next section, the tools and equipment used during employment should be described. Similar to the previous section, you can choose to use bullet points instead of an essay. Again, as an example, this is how my tools and equipment section looked like. Finally, your employer needs to sign on the last section. This concludes the first part of our TRA versus EA episode. In the next video, I will discuss the step-by-step process and the requirements for skills assessment for Engineers Australia or EA. Until our next video, kita-kits mga trops!